Hi there, I hope you're doing well, and I absolutely hope that everything is going well for you. Welcome to Elevate Nursing. I am Nurse Kate, and I was not here last week. I wasn't feeling very well, so I thought to skip last week and come back this week. And I'll start off by sharing with you podcasts that I have been listening to for a really long time, but more specifically in the past few months. I realized that within nursing and midwifery, there is a lot of diversity, and with that diversity comes nursing and midwifery stories as well. There is research in the mix. So I listened to this. As I listen to podcasts, I'm drawn towards those that are related to nursing and midwifery. So I compiled the best of these in my catalog, and I thought to share it with you. The first is one that is related to midwifery. This is M's the Word podcast. This is a podcast that is hosted by two individuals, that is Laura and Katie, and it is a podcast on miscarriages. So they allow people to express themselves. Actually, let me look at the description of this because I know that they capture it really well. This podcast aims to break the silence and stigma on miscarriage and baby loss, one episode at a time. So I know that one of the two ladies who host this podcast is a healthcare provider. They share stories of miscarriage that occur during different phases of pregnancy, and they talk to individuals who have experienced miscarriages. They talk to relatives of these individuals, communities, and so on. They as well talk to healthcare providers who have been support systems for those who have gone through miscarriages, and they talk to individuals who are caregivers but are not particularly healthcare providers. I think from this podcast I have learned so much, and I think you'd learn so much as well. You'd pick on so much as well. It has allowed me to benchmark in a way, because I may not, or at least within our specialties, we may not come across people who have gone through miscarriages, and it's important for us to be prepared. So as we listen to this, you already can see what these individuals go through. And as I listened as well to healthcare providers who have been support systems for those who have gone through miscarriages, it gives you an opportunity to pick on certain qualities or skills or certain activities that they have done that have been useful for their patients. So I think this is a really good podcast. I find as well that it's not exclusively structured for nurses and midwives. Those who have gone through miscarriages as well, or those who know somebody who has gone through a miscarriage, it gives, as you listen to the story of another individual, it allows you to not feel as though you're in the wilderness. You get an idea of what they're going through, because sometimes when people go through things, they might not express it fully, or as they go through it, or at least as they mourn such experiences, such as miscarriages. So as you listen to the story of somebody else, you can already picture how to be a support system for this person, because we are quite similar. As much as we're different, we're quite similar. So such experiences are really important to listen to. I'll leave a link to it in the description box, and I hope that you'd find it useful. The second podcast is the ESC podcast. ESC is the European Society of Cardiology podcast. I've been listening to this as I get into research, and I find it so useful. I think it would be applicable to nurses within critical care or healthcare providers who are interested in cardiovascular health, non-communicable diseases, and so on. And this one is quite interesting because the other day, actually, I was listening to an episode where somebody was explaining their research, and they were talking about it in a way that humanizes research, because as you get into research, you'll realize that there's a lot of paperwork and reading and so on. And listening to somebody else talk about their paper, you can already hear their passion, and they talk about certain things that might not be put down on paper when it comes to writing educational pieces. So that is a podcast that I listen to regularly. The other thing about the ESC podcast is that I usually don't have the privilege of sitting behind a laptop and going through research articles. So whenever I go on walks or whenever I'm sitting in a bus or in traffic, I listen to this podcast, and it allows me to enjoy research in a different setup, not only sitting and going through the paperwork. I'll leave a link to it as well in the description box, and I'm absolutely sure that you will find it useful. The third one is our very own, the Elevate Nursing podcast. Now, this is a fortnightly podcast where we have 2 shows. The first is the Medical Mondays show, which we share on YouTube as well on podcast, but we have more episodes on that through the podcast. And there we share snippets of medical conditions, terminologies, and so on for nursing and midwifery education. The other show is quite diverse. We share nursing stories and so on, and it picks on nursing and midwifery from different points. So that one I think you'd find really useful. I'll leave a link to it in the description box. It is produced by the Elevate Nursing community, so I think you'd feel at home if you are a community member listening to the Elevate Nursing podcast. It is curated for healthcare providers, not only nurses and midwives. The fourth podcast is one that I have gotten into since August this year, and this is the FreshRN podcast. This one I would want to look at the description. All right, so listen to this description. Your first year as a registered nurse is challenging. This podcast is hosted by experienced nurses from FreshRN.com who discuss the basics of that first year, from orientation, code blues, tricks of the trade and personal experiences, to time management, delegation, patient deaths, and more. I was listening to FreshRN a few months ago. It was in August, and I was doing a bit of packing, and I felt as though I was a fly on a wall, listening to other healthcare providers talk about their experiences, clinical scenarios in a very objective way. It was such catharsis for me. I'd encourage you to listen to the FreshRN podcast. It's not only built for, at least from the stories I have listened to, it's not only built for first-year nurses. The people who put together FreshRN talk about their experiences during different professional stages. So I think this one you'd find absolutely useful. The link to it will be in the description box. The fifth one is one that has an interesting story behind it. In 2018, I was doing an exam and I was quite anxious during this exam. And when I left the exam room, I was absolutely sure that I was going to fail this exam. Funny enough, I figured I need to get I need to familiarize myself with how to deal with failure. And there has to be a silver lining. So I left the exam room and Googled How to Fail, and this is what came up: How to Fail podcast by Elizabeth Day. It's a podcast that talks about the opportunities that come from failure and the silver linings of failure. And I have learned from 2018 June how to better deal with failure. It introduced me as well to Otega Wagba, who's a really good writer. She has several books, and one that I'm on the lookout for is Let's Talk About Money. She has several other books, and one of them I leave here, which I don't remember the name now, but it was really useful when it comes to maneuvering my professional life. So How to Fail podcast by Elizabeth Day, I had listened to it through Spotify. I'll leave a link to it in the description box, and I absolutely hope that you'll find it useful. The sixth podcast is The Writing Life, and this one is curated for those who are within research and the writing world. It's not built for healthcare providers only, because there are different stories from people who write in different styles. And I know that research is not written in one way. There are so many ways to put together research. It's not only qualitative and quantitative research. There are different kinds. So if you're looking to listen to the stories of different individuals who write in different ways, including novelists, you can listen to the Writing Life podcast. I'll leave a link to it in the description box, and I'm sure that this podcast will enrich your life in one way or the other. At least they have mine, and I want to believe that they will yours as well. If you know any podcast that you'd like us to listen to, you can leave it in the comment section. Write it down there. I'll go through them and I'll listen to them and give you feedback on that. If you have found this episode useful, entertaining, interesting, you can go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. With that, I wish you a lovely day, and until next time, elevate nursing. Take care. Bye bye.